Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome to another edition of Monday Morning Coffee. I am your host, Alex Gore. I'm here with Jeffrey, or Jeff, however you want to call him, Pinheiro. He is the leader in the industry when it comes to BIM and technology, at least for architecture. He has spoken and taught classes at national conferences and is a creator of TheRevitKid.com, a worldwide resource on all things Revit and BIM related. Additionally, Jeffrey holds a position at as a BIM manager of one of the largest BIM construction management firms. Welcome inside the firm. Glad to have you on.
Alex, thanks for having me, man. I know you and I have we connected a long time ago, and we've been in and out, but we've never. I don't think we've interviewed each other yet on our show, so I'm excited to do this.
Yep. And if you haven't checked out BIM After Dark, please go check it out. I'll be on in a couple weeks or so. But let's get started back to those early days, because it was probably around 2012, around there. When did you get started?
Yeah,
online?
Actually much earlier. So the RevitKid.com, which is a blog dedicated pretty much solely to Revit tutorials and tips that I started back in 2009 is actually the first post. The very first post I did was 2009. 2012 and 13 is when I was the first time I put out full length sort of courses from it. But for those first 3 to 4 years, it was just free Revit tutorial tip content, and that kind of continued even after the courses. But yeah, it was 2009, and at the time I was probably about maybe a year and a half into using Revit at that time, and it was really it's an interesting story because I'm sure lots of folks out there can relate. I was in studio, architecture studio. And I was extremely proficient in AutoCAD. I worked at a firm from a young age that pretty much primarily digitized hand drafting was kind of what we started doing. So I was good at CAD, but we saw this Revit thing, and as a firm, who did a lot of digitization, you can start to see the benefits of the efficiency of documentation with Revit as opposed to CAD. Even things like just organizing view references and section cuts and railings, not having to trim thousands of balusters and stuff like that. So we got into learning it, and then I eventually in 2008 Revit introduced rendering into the software. So for those that don't know, pre-2008, Revit did not have any rendering capability within itself. So you could do 3D modeling, you could do documentation, but you couldn't do any like ray trace type of renders. So when that came out, I thought this was a perfect opportunity now to start trying this in studio, for school. Until then, I was doing, AutoCAD for plans, sections, elevations, and then either SketchUp or 3D Max with like a V-Ray or some sort of rendering plugin for my renderings. And so it was sort of like a win-win for me. I was like, I can do my plans, sections, elevations, and my model all in the same place. Like, this is so cool. Yeah. And the second I did my first presentation, my thesis or my studio presentation, I got a ton of questions from fellow students. And the blog was actually my way of answering some of the questions without having to answer the same questions over and over again, because naturally a lot of the questions were very similar. So I would just record a video, post it on the blog, and then when I got the same question from another friend, I would just send them a link to that video to say here's the answer to the question, so I don't have to sit down and show you again.
Do you think that, because it's pretty entrepreneurial, but did that just come from literally like not having to do it again, or was it like a 2 birds 1 stone kind of scenario? Is like, okay, I can answer these questions, and in the back of my mind I might build it up to something.
I don't know. I think the first, I never even imagined that the blog would be any type of money making project or anything like that until probably 2012 or 13, which is I think when you and I connected as well. And so for 4 years or so, there was absolutely no thought in my mind, I don't think, of the potential or possibility of making money from the blog, but there was definitely an efficiency of not having to answer questions a bunch of times. I was honestly just really jazzed up about it. It was there at the time, I think, is when some of the Revit bloggers, as we know today, that a lot of people may be familiar with, like Steve Stafford, and there's this guy Greg down in Florida who doesn't do it anymore. Even Paul Albin, like a lot of these characters were blogging about it, and so their perspective was not the same as mine, being a 17-year-old or 18-year-old in school as an architecture student, to how I saw the value of Revit. So to me, it was just kind of joining the fold of sharing this awesome tool, and sharing it with the world. And I really don't, I think back to this a lot, and I don't know, I'm not sure what the motivation was. The more I think about it, maybe it was the motivate. I think if anything, it was probably just the motivation of just being jazzed up about this software and having a place to talk about it. Obviously, seeing what at the time social media barely existed, if it did at all. YouTube was honestly barely even existing at that point in time. So it wasn't necessarily about clicks and shares. It was, I would say, probably the only motivation on my end was probably just website views, right? Blogger.com views, which just feels good, right? To see people actually viewing your stuff and getting, shared maybe by some other content creators. But yeah, it was, I think I do have that mindset that you're talking about. Obviously from all of the projects that I've done over the years now, that sort of entrepreneurial mindset. At the time, it was never a money entrepreneurial thing. It was more of a sharing, teaching, and just general passion, excitement about something.
Yeah. How has it grown since then? What was your decision then to make some courses, and how has it grown from there?
Yeah, sure. So it's funny because it's always paralleled my quote unquote day job. And so, as I mentioned, I started working. I went to a technical high school, and so for anyone not in the United States or in an area where maybe you have those, a vocational technical school is where you can actually learn a trade while you're in high school. Technically, depending on what the trade is, if it doesn't require postgraduate studies, then you can roll into like an apprenticeship. And let's say you're an electrician or something. It's a great way to sort of get your high school education while also learning trades. And so, my school had 12 or 14 different trades, and one of them, there was a couple that you would consider sort of professional post, where you kind of had to go to college after the fact. And one of them was architecture. And so I was fortunate enough to actually start studying architecture while in high school. And part of that is a work study program where you can team up with local firms and actually work there. Once you turn 16, you could drive and get a job and all that stuff. And so I was actually working from 16 on. The only jobs I've ever had, the only W-2 jobs I've ever had my entire life have been in the AEC industry. So with that, I've paralleled, really the Revit kid paralleled with what I was doing in my professional career. And so, over time evolving, I continued producing tutorials and videos and sharing anything new I would learn as I was excited going through it. I went from the smaller firm to a larger firm that was, basically from doing, let's say, houses and maybe small commercial work to now large schools and working with, larger project stakeholders like Board of Eds, and also integrating with A&E and structure much more, right? And so from there, the content, I think, go ahead, sorry.
No, quick question, because your jobs are paralleling. Where did you go to college? Was it typical architecture or was it more drafting? And did your jobs?
No, it was typical architecture. So I went, I went from high school. I actually went to community college for 3 years. Part of that was I couldn't make a decision on the 3 or 4 architecture schools that I was applying to, and the one more locally in Connecticut that I wanted to go to was in the process of getting accredited. And I always knew I wanted to get my license. It was just one of those things. No matter what, I say that like the end of this journey that started when I was 16, it needs to end with me having my license. It didn't even matter at this point what it took or what what I would do with it after the fact. It was just one of those things where I was determined, as I started here, and this is where I wanted to go. So I had to go somewhere that was accredited, right, and be able to use that degree to then take tests and so on and so forth. So I actually went to community college, which I highly suggest for anyone trying to figure out their pathway, just for the sake of the cost of school in the United States. I saved a ton of money going to community college, and to be fair, the education was very good there. As far as the core curriculum, algebra is algebra, man, wherever you take it, right? And so, I got to bang out, 60, 70 credits at a much lower rate than I would have. But at the same time, I also took an architectural technology associate's degree there, so I was focused on that. And I also minored in construction management, which is like a separate. So I actually got 2 associate's degrees when I was at the community college. What was nice about that is the only difference was it kind of forced me to not just take the building technology classes and that building science classes, but I had to take a couple business and finance type of classes. That was kind of the only difference between construction management and architecture at that school. So it was actually down the road, it actually became pretty valuable. But long story short, while I was done with, once I finished the community college, the University of Hartford, which is here in Connecticut, they received their accreditation from NCARB. So, which means, for anyone not familiar, that means when you go to that school, it goes towards your ability to be licensed. You kind of have to go to an accredited, or to get a degree from an accredited institution. So it was an accredited master's, which as you're looking through what you want to do, there's a 5 years bachelor's, there's some that have a 4-year bachelor's, there's some that have a 4 plus whatever. And so, I wasn't necessarily fully, the idea of a master's didn't really make a huge difference to me, other than I enjoy teaching, as obviously everyone can tell if you followed me over the years and what I'm mentioning right now. And having a master's degree is very helpful if you want to sort of teach at a university level. So it was that kind of helped guide me towards that. It was a 4+2 accredited program at University of Hartford. So it was 4-year undergrad, 2-year master's, so 6 years in total, and you have the accreditation or the degree that's accredited. So my options were either a 5-year bachelor's or a 6-year master's and get the accreditation. So that's what I went for. So I transferred, or I shouldn't say transferred, because I graduated for the associate's degree. And then I started kind of like as a junior with a couple core classes I had to redo in the bachelor's program. So that alone, saving 2.5 years of a private bachelor's degree made a huge difference on how many loans I had when I graduated. I can tell you that. So anyone thinking about it, I highly encourage you to give your local community colleges a look. But how that sort of paralleled, and I think that's kind of where you're going, is how that paralleled with the Revit kit in my profession as well. Is I kind of, the where I went to school and what I was doing at the time also kind of, I don't say forced me, but helped me sort of make some moves professionally too that I might not have made if I did a different path with my education. And part of that was staying locally for a couple of years means I've stood at the job that I was at during high school, right? So I was there for a few more years. But then moving up to go to school in Hartford, which is about an hour and a half from where I was currently going to school and working. That was an opportunity to look for a position in that area. And there was also only so many hours that I could get working with my current firm based on the type of work we do for the intern development program. So that's when I started, looking around for a larger firm. So it was like a 5-person firm, and I jumped up to, it was 60. I think they had like 65 people when I started there in one office, and they had a couple other offices. And so that was a local A&E firm. The interesting part about how this all parallels is they were an A&E firm that at the time that I applied were attempting the transition from CAD to Revit. And so at that point now I'm, probably, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years into using pretty much solely Revit at the previous firm. And then these guys are, they're basically trying out their first couple projects, and they know about the Revit gig because I put on my resume, right? And talk to them about it. And so it did become sort of an in, it became a way that I can get into that firm. And then I stayed there for almost 5-6 years, transitioned them to Revit, right? I was part of the core team that was helping this process of transitioning this firm from CAD to Revit.
A great idea nugget in there is there's some plugins from different websites that are using AI to generate things. And if a student could play around and document that and put that out there, it is extremely valuable. These are some that we're looking into and we might use. But if we had 4 candidates and 2 of them were, hey, either 2 of these are great, and one of them was the Revit kid, but for the AI, I mean, it's a slam dunk. It's easy.
Yeah, it's and again, like I don't know, I can't pinpoint the exact motivation for continuing on posting videos and whatnot. But it did, it definitely, I think the timing of it was well too, where as 2008, I would say between 2008 and maybe 2010 is probably when a lot of the firms were looking at the transition and starting to hear the buzz was happening, the traction of Revit and BIM was coming into play. And so I think timing was good there, in the sense that I somewhat made myself an authority just by posting free videos, and then you can use that to get in. But then it was great because my content, even on the blog, I mean, you can see if you go through. I wouldn't suggest. I mean, feel free, anyone out there wants to. There's 1,500 posts, so it might take a while. But if you were to scroll through from in chronological order, you would see that the content very much just parallels what I was doing professionally and sometimes in school too. So I transitioned from the smaller firm doing more residential, smaller commercial, digitizing, focused on documentation, et cetera, to a larger firm doing a lot of schoolwork, working with engineers in-house and structural engineers in-house, and collaborating and the problems become something a little different to solve on the technology side, as well as the design process is a little different when you're working for committees versus individuals and so on and so forth. So I think that helped create, or maybe it helped relate the content to different people too.
Yep. You started a YouTube channel at what time, and how do you think of YouTube now?
That's a good question. It's because it's definitely changed. So the only reason I started a YouTube channel, and I think if you look at it, it says it's like, I think I started the channel like 12-13 years ago, was a free way to host my videos on the blog. Until YouTube came around, I was using Screencast or some version of Tech Media. I don't remember what it's called at the time. And basically just to host videos and then link those to the blog post. And so there was, believe it or not, there was no way to really host videos, especially free hosting, for consumption like that on a blog until pretty much YouTube, and then Wistia, and obviously Vimeo. There's a lot more now, but so I started it. It was never thought of as a social media platform or a way of growing an audience or anything. It was literally, this is a free area that I can post my videos and then just put them on the blog so people can click them. So if you look at the first like 3-4 years of content, there's links or they're embedded, and those are all screencast.com or something like that if you click them. But then at some point in time, you see they start to transition to YouTube. And so that was literally the only reason why I did it. And then even honestly until probably pre-pandemic. So honestly, only 3-4 years ago is when I started really looking at YouTube as almost like its own thing, like its own channel, its own almost website within property of social media, areas. And I don't know if that was because of when Google purchased YouTube and it became more like a search engine and you started getting SEO from it. But until probably 2019, 18, it was still sort of more of just, I put them up there. I would embed them in my blog posts, and yeah, maybe they'd get views and stuff from YouTube, but still it was just a way to embed videos in the blog post. And then pre-pandemic, I started using it a little more. You started seeing some traction as far as I don't remember when Google purchased it, but
I can't remember either. Yeah.
Once you started getting like Google search results that were videos, like that's a massive, huge transition in how you see it, right? If until that, right, it would be you Google, hey, Revit tutorials, then you might see a blog post of mine, right? But now if you type Revit tutorials, you'll see a list of 15 videos that are all related to that, and then blog posts. And so it's a huge difference for that. And then the real transition was during the pandemic, and when I started BIM After Dark Live was really when I started to see the YouTube channel as something that could almost live on its own if it needed to. I think I'm at like 65,000 subscribers now.
69, I just looked.
Awesome. And so when I started the live stream, it was under 18. It was like 18,000. And so I think that just shows you the difference. So that was 2009. So that was like 15 years or something like that, or 10 to 11 years. It grew. 19,000 is nothing to balk at, but like that was just videos being posted there. But then, once I started the live stream, obviously the pandemic is probably has a lot to do with it too, the way people consume the content. And then I started really looking at, really looking into the science of YouTube as a growth opportunity for the BIM After Dark sort of brand content, and you name it. And so that, I think that shows, right, that it goes from 19 to 70 in the 3-year period versus 0 to 19 in the first like 10 or so.
Yeah. Very interesting. A 3-part question. Now, if you're thinking about YouTube, when you're making videos, is your thought pattern one of these 3 options, or secret option 4 that I haven't even mentioned? The one is, there's basically there's patterns, there's engagement, there's story, there's people you can watch and learn from. Like, okay, I'm gonna create a video in this sort of fashion that is not only good for YouTube, but YouTube's goal is to make it good for the people, right? So that's one. Another is, hey, I'm just gonna do what I always did. I'm gonna make a video on whatever I did this week and just put it up. Or 3, is there like user generated, like, hey, people are hitting me up on Twitter, or I don't even know, or in the comments and stuff, and then I'm addressing that. How are you thinking about that?
So it's kind of a blend of everything now. For the longest time, it was literally, I'm just making this video, and I mean, I didn't even have until the live streams. I don't even think I had a camera on me when I was doing tutorials. Like the first 15 years of videos are just a screen grab with my voice, right? And so it's the mindset always kind of starts there. Most of the videos that I create are generated from user questions, some version of it, whether it's on Twitter, YouTube, email, discussion I had, or projects I'm working on, right? That's displaying. So the essence of the content is still pretty basic, where it's tutorial videos based on a very specific topic within this very specific sort of niche. But over time now, obviously there's this realization that within the YouTube realm, you still have to play by the YouTube rules if you want people to see those videos who you believe should see those videos. I think for the most part, the audience of Revit tutorial videos is looking for exactly that, right? Revit tutorial videos. And so it is hard sometimes to figure out, what is the best way to write a story around that. And so I think the most recent series that I did, that was not the live stream, but video series, which is called the Mid-Century Modern Makeover, or Mid-Century Modern Kitchen series, which was an 18-part series I did last year. And that one I think is one that really shows the blend of all that you're talking about, like all three ideas. And so basically what I did there is I took a real residential project that I'm working on with a real clients, and I basically just recorded. I screen grabbed my entire Revit side of it and technology side of it, whether I was scanning with my phone, whether I was using Photoshop, whether I was using Revit. I just recorded all that during the process. And then I went back and I narrowed it over and then added content in between, right? And so that became more of a story base of start to finish. Here I am measuring existing conditions of the kitchen. I'm modeling those existing conditions. I'm sketching the idea. I'm going, and it's the whole process. And that one is one where I definitely tried to think outside the box more of a storyline for each sort of video, as opposed to just hey, here's how you model X, Y, and Z in Revit. And I think both are valid, right? Because to some extent, a lot of what people might want is what I'm talking about. It's like, hey, I even know how to model a parametric round window in Revit. They don't necessarily want or need me to have a 15-minute storyline about, I don't know.
The history of railings.
I mean, there's ways, creative ways you can do it and concepts throughout it, but I just think that there has to be a healthy balance, because to some extent, you may just want a quick 4-minute video of not an intro, not just, hey, boom, I'm in Revit, here's how you start, right? And so, but YouTube may not necessarily like that, depending on how, and so it's been a big blend between them. I've started over the last couple of years, I started focusing more on SEO and keywords and thumbnails and trying to figure out in sort of, experimenting with those and seeing if I'm getting different results. And there has just the focus on that. There's been a noticeable difference just in views alone, right? In the mass of the content that I have. And so it obviously works, but to some extent, the content has always been very similar. And there really is only so much story you can put behind, like, how to make a railing extension in Revit. Like, that's what it is, right? It's there's no much more to it. And if I did a 3-minute intro about you driving down the road and in a skateboard and running into a railing extension, like, people probably wouldn't care, because they're just there to see the railing extension, how to actually physically do it, right? And so I think there's a balance in the type of content that I create.
Yep, absolutely. Could we kind of pivot from that and go into what is a BIM manager, and specifically, like, what is your role? How much of it is managing literally templates and files and creating efficiencies versus production work? I think I saw recently you were doing something with grading. And then is that typical in a BIM manager role? So for example, a lot of people go to architecture schools, hey, I'm going to be an architect and stuff like that, but there's this need for BIM managers. And I don't know where they come from. I don't know what woodworks they pop up. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting because so my role and what I do is wildly different than what a BIM manager at an architecture firm would do. So I'm and we actually on the construction side, we even pivoted from the term BIM manager to VDC is the term that we use, which is virtual design and construction. And so we've even shifted a little bit there, which is kind of interesting. But I can try to answer both for you, because I think what I'm currently doing at a multi-billion-dollar construction management company as a manager of VDC and BIM is pretty different than what a BIM manager at an architecture and engineering firm would be doing. We as a construction manager, we're not, unless it's a design build or there's very specific things going on, we're not necessarily producing construction documents, right? So the use of BIM and models and Revit is much different than the end goal of most design firms, which is producing a set of drawings, right? So with that alone, I think the differences are more of my role is we strive to figure out the best utilization of the models when it comes to the execution of work. So I'm constantly trying to figure out different ways to physically, I guess, virtually use the model to perform things like, you know, concrete and whatever the heck it is we're doing, right? And so there's a different mindset than I'm trying to figure out how to make the most efficient set of documents from the model while producing a good model while being coordinated and blah blah blah. So I think when it comes to the design side of things, you know, I think naturally most of the BIM managers come from the Revit champions of those firms or related firms, and they're the power users who sort of mold into that realm. That being said, it's a good question because most of the ones that I know, that was their path. It was they took maybe a more traditional architectural path. They might have done the intern thing for a while. Maybe they even did job captain, designer, you know, whatever. But they ended up really, you know, becoming power users of Revit or BIM, whatever program they're using. They enjoy it. Maybe, hopefully, they have somewhat of a passion for it if they're going to decide to become a BIM manager. But then, you know, they sort of naturally are the good fit for, you know, like, okay, now why don't you lead this company in setting up those standards and et cetera, et cetera. But it's interesting because the way you ask that is also if you structured your journey for that being the end case, and not, you know, taking the typical architecture or engineering path and just sort of veering off because you have this passion, what does that look like? I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there's many. I don't know how many people are going to, you know, a freshman in college saying, I want to be a BIM manager.
Yeah. And I don't even know. I mean,
that's
they're
going
probably,
to be, and maybe that's happening,
yeah.
right? And so it's interesting when you think about it, because that is a little bit of a different career path. I think the more you know about the overall process of architecture, design, construction, I think it'll make you a better BIM manager, not just the software. I think that's one thing that maybe having someone going through the typical paths is beneficial. Because the more you know about everything, as far as like why does the plumber want to model it this way? Why does the plumbing engineer want to model it this way? Why is the architect approaching it this way? Why, I think it's kind of have to know that stuff to be able to help set up standards for those things, on top of knowing the software. And so I don't think you can become a successful BIM manager if you only know the software.
I agree, because I was going to state maybe there is such a course or a degree that is like building technologist. But my thought is exactly the same as yours is, okay, you might know different technologies and stuff with like that, which is great, but holy cow, the amount of errors and stuff that you could just say like, oh, model it like this, like, oh, that's not going to be useful. Going all the way to where you are now, like, hey, eventually this might get to some construction people. And they're gonna need to build.
You're right.
And if you just say, hey, this is the efficient way to model it, but it has no information, no utilization, is hard to edit, you know. So it would almost have to be like a degree after you've had 3 to 5 years in the industry, you know.
I do feel like that's that experience, the building and construction experience and knowledge is pretty valuable in that. And that's not to say that, you know, if you know, but then again, I guess, you know, Revit's one of those software, and probably you could probably say the same about ArchiCAD and Vectorworks and anything that's considered BIM. Knowing construction, like you said, construction technology or building science, whatever you want to call it, and processes and standards, I think you're not going to be able to be a power user of those programs if you don't know that as well. I think because they're so reliant on the knowledge of construction to actually use. You know, if you didn't know what a fitting, what kind of fitting was supposed to go on this hydronic supply pipe, then how do you know what kind of fitting to apply to those settings when you're modeling it in Revit, right? Or why that fitting needs to be a 45 and it can't go further than 60 degrees or whatever, right?
Yeah, interesting. To kind of wrap it up, is there any last thought that you want to get across to our audience, and where can they go if they want to kind of look into your stuff, or you know, I wouldn't say get a hold of you, you have a job, but just connect?
They can always get a hold of me. You can just at the Revit Kid on Twitter or YouTube. You can just Google the Revit Kid. If you go to bimafterdark.com, I do have a private community at bimafterdark.com. So if you go to community.bimafterdark.com, that's an area where we have all my full length courses, as well as a social media style setup, but with only a small group of community members, where most of us are just architects and engineers, and we're helping each other get better at Revit, asking questions, so on and so forth. As far as just sort of wrapping it up, I guess first, thanks for having me on. I appreciate this. I think we could go down a million rabbit holes. One of the interesting things, about, I think, my story, that for future architects, for example, maybe thinking about is, architecture school, for example. I feel like it sets you up for lots of different paths especially within the AEC industry. For the longest time, and we can argue about the pedagogy of architecture and the structure of what you learn in school versus what you learn in the field and all that. And I do still think that there's quite a bit of knowledge, or quite a bit of topics lacking in the architectural education process. But the skill set that you learn of problem solving and communicating visually is something that I think applies to everybody. And the more I think about everything that I do and all the different successes I've had in my life so far, whether it's the Revit Kid / BIM After Dark stuff, whether it's what I'm doing now with Turner Construction, whether it's the residential architecture side of it, whether it's even the SEO, social media marketing that has to happen with it all. All the skill sets that I have, or all the successes I have in those areas, to me, the more I think about them, come from that core ability to communicate complicated things in simple ways and visually. On the construction side, we do a lot of it is communicating a written plan or schedule or idea that a contractor may have written out, that we're working with, that almost all human beings wouldn't even understand if they read it, right? Same idea with floor plans, right? A lot of people don't know what they're looking at with floor plans. Same idea with YouTube thumbs and stuff like that. Like, all of this is conveying and communicating visually. And so it's funny when I think about all the tentacles that my career and profession has taken me in. It does all come back to that core ability to be able to communicate complicated ideas simply. And so, I know, listeners of your podcast aren't just students and plenty of veterans of the industry, but I do think that that's an important thing to focus on. And then to the veterans of the industry out there, I think I'm hoping that the content that I create and the ideas that I put forward are helping show the variety of what this profession has to offer. And so hopefully what I've been able to do thus far is that. And my final sort of note is, my end goal with all of this, with my sort of holy grail before I hang up the mouse, I guess, hang up the mouse is to see this thing called BIM fully come to the fruition in what we know it can be, which would be a full model to construction process, with the elimination of all the bullshit that our industry has, right? The submittals, RFIs, construction documents, specifications, like you go through the inefficiencies of all of that, and being able to digitize all of this into a model erases all of the headaches that everyone deals with on a daily basis, whether the architect, whether the contractor, whether the engineer. 90% of the problems that we see are due to old, inefficient processes. And so my end goal, and the reason I'm so passionate about this, is I believe that the idea of BIM, not just Revit, not whatever program you want to call, but the idea of it is a solution to that. And so I'm hoping that we can get there.
That was beautiful. You only forgot the government in the inefficiency category.
Yeah, well, if you're stuck doing government work, then
No, just
that
submitting. I mean,
yeah.
they are.
So yes, authorities having jurisdiction are always going to be something that we deal with, just like lawyers and contract law is always going to be something we have to deal with. But my whole take on that is, we are the professionals, right? And so if enough of us say that this is the way we should be doing something, then lawyers first of all are going to they only write the contracts we tell them to. They amend them the way we tell them to, right? And so we could say it's contract that's holding us back from doing it, but the truth is we can make a lawyer write a contract, however we want. And then the government's, in time, and most of the authorities are all, are professionals like us. A lot of them came from the field like us, right? And so over time, we got to change some of their minds and see if we can adjust. It's not going to be easy, but I have full belief that it's the time is coming. I think the technology is there.
Yep.
What I'm seeing from all the sides of the industry that I get to see is I believe the technology is now caught up to the idea. And so now we got to just bring everyone else with us.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your time.
Of course, man. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate having me.